Hi, everyone. Welcome to our session. I'm super excited to have everyone here. My name is April Rassa. I lead our product marketing organization here at Celigo. Before we get started, let me just cover a few housekeeping items. This session is being recorded, so everyone who registered will get the recording, but we want to hear from you. So please use the Q&A panel to ask your questions. We will get those at the end. And if we don't, we'll make sure to respond to you directly. So with that, I think that covers sort of the basics that you need to know. Let me just give a little bit of context in terms of how we came up with this topic. And I think it's really telling. In the last webinar that we had, we surveyed all of our attendees, and the overwhelming number of folks had governance and guardrails as their biggest concern. And guess what? That's the topic we're covering today. When it comes to AI agents in your business, that's your biggest concern. So I am thrilled, super thrilled to invite Amy Farrow, our CIO, here to talk about this topic. Amy, welcome.
April, thanks so much. I'm really excited to be here. I'm excited to be at Celigo and excited to be here discussing this really important topic for all of our customers.
Thank you. I'm super thrilled you joined Celigo as well, and that I get to personally work with you. So I know a little bit about your background, but the audience doesn't. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your career journey?
Happy to. I guess I'll start with my career has been spent in technology leadership roles across both enterprise technology companies and consumer technology companies. I was most recently CIO at Lyft and Infoblox. Across these companies, my focus has always been the same. How do we use technology to make the business faster, smarter, and more scalable? And in many of those companies, we were often doing something that had never been done before. And so all those experiences, I think, really lend themselves and equip me for this moment in time that we're all navigating.
Yes, for sure. Well, you've led modernization in a lot of different environments. And I'd love to maybe just kind of dig in a little bit in terms of understanding what part of maybe scaling AI today feels a bit familiar from past transformation waves that you've led, and what feels new.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. In terms of what's familiar, every kind of transformative era we've lived through, internet, mobile, cloud, SaaS, where we have this, major technological shift, creates a little bit of confusion as you're kind of navigating what does this mean? What does it mean for our business? What does it mean for me? So I think that's familiar. I think the other part that's familiar is really the reality that technology is an enabler, but behavior change and change management are as critical as ever. So I think that's another thing that to me is very much kind of a similar pattern. And I think what you to just tie those two things together, there's a lot of talk about AI native organizations. And the reality is that they are perceived and moving faster because they're not fighting kind of legacy habits. And so I think those, my two earlier points just reinforce like why those two components are a really important part of navigating this change. AI natives are doing it one way, and everyone else is really kind of trying to accelerate those changes so that we can get the most out of the technology shift.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And then, if you think about all of the changes, both on the change management side, on the people side, and also on the technology side, I'm curious, AI obviously is burgeoning. There's a lot of transformations happening across the business. How has that sort of changed your role in particular as a CIO?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think, well, maybe I can talk about what's new and how that frames how I think about my role. What I think is new in this transformation is a lot of the prior like advances I just referenced were more about delivery model changes, maybe the speed of innovation, and we're seeing that here too. But this is in at least my life like the most transformative moment I think we're going to live through because it's not just changing the delivery model, but it's actually reshaping how work gets done, how organizations are designed. And then I think the closest parallel is probably the internet. I think some of the other where it took some time to kind of really understand the power of this new capability and what it meant, and how it would kind of dramatically impact different organizations, different industries. But I think the three things that maybe we haven't seen before, the democratization of building,
Mm,
the making the technification, if that's a word, of pretty much every role. I
mhm.
already mentioned org redesign, not just IT redesign. It's really every organization is fundamentally, being redesigned around how the work is shifting. And then the pace, I think over time in my career in tech, it always feels like the pace is increasing. It's never slowed down. I think just like the curve of the pace, is a pretty dramatic shift with all the AI advances. And so those are kind of the three things I think are new. So in
Yeah.
terms of my role, given all those conditions I just kind of explained, one, I think it's really exciting. We have the ability to really supercharge every employee inside the company with some of these new capabilities. But this is where governance comes in. I think managing both the ability to democratize access to building and supercharging employees is also, it needs to be partnered with a governance model to make sure that you protect sensitive data and protect customer data. So the way I really think about it is I've kind of become the pacemaker. Um,
Mm,
what does that mean? So we want to move fast, but we also need to know when we need to slow things down. There may be opportunities where we want to create friction on purpose. And I also think we don't want to say yes to everything. We want to really make sure that the things that we're doing are going to really create enterprise value and value that we can translate into customer value. And so the pacemaker is kind of this term I've recently adopted, that I think is that mindset. I want to help us go fast, but there are times when we need to kind of be measured in our speed and be thoughtful about, how fast we want to go in different environments and in different conditions.
I love that framing. I love that framing. And in fact, just to double click on that. So, yes, I think AI has absolutely opened entirely new ways of how we work. It's reshaping how we build,
Mhm.
from workflows to connecting systems to automating processes that really used to be manual and time consuming. And now we can, I mean, in a world, we can bring all of this data and insights across dozens of applications and systems in minutes, literally
Mhm.
in minutes, instead of weeks or months, and really helping teams to not only move faster, but to make smarter decisions in context of the business. At the same time, you hit it. Like, yes, we're seeing a lot of people across the business become builders. They're
Mhm.
not your typical developers. They're your business line of business folks. They're, across different sectors. And we'll actually get into some of those examples specifically with Celigo. But
Mhm.
I'm curious in terms of how that shift is changing the way IT leaders like yourself kind of
Mhm.
think about balancing both speed and innovation with that right level of security and governance.
Yeah. No, and I think this is, I wasn't surprised it came up as a key kind of, topic for, our customers. I think, it's top of mind, it's top of mind for me pretty much all the time. And I think in all the kind of CIO conversations I'm having, this is where it is. What I would say is, you know, a lot of the traditional controls that within IT, exist because are responsible for, data quality, for data resiliency, for compliance, and they want to basically make sure that they have the right controls to make sure that they can live up to those obligations.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so what we really need to think through the lens of is how do we, as we federate more capabilities across the organization, how do we put the right controls in place? And one of the lenses I'm really thinking through is that shifting from kind of upfront control to, some degree of controls, but really an observability lens.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the pace at which, things are moving, the ability, I mean, the changes are coming on a daily basis. So finding that right balance between the right controls that, but also really focusing on observability. So
Mhm.
I think good governance does give you that ability to federate. It's what enables speed and doesn't limit it. And so it's finding, that sweet spot for your organization. So if it's, too tight, you're going to be really slow and not move at all. And if you don't have any controls, you have chaos. You have to find for your organization, and, I'm working on that at Celigo, is where is the right balance.
Mhm.
And so my goal mindset is how do we enable with the right guardrails so that we can unlock the power of these capabilities, get them into the right hands, but have the right protections in place so that we feel confident that we can continue to go at that pace. So in terms of the capabilities we need, I mentioned this a little bit with observability, but digging a level deeper, visibility, auditability, alerting, and the ability to do really an enterprise-wide risk assessment. So those are some of the things that I've been thinking about, and it's an evolution, but that's kind of the current thinking in my head and how we're approaching it at Celigo.
Thank you. Thanks for kind of grounding us on that. I'd love to maybe shift gears now for the audience and kind of get into some practical applications and how we internally are kind of thinking about bringing that to the forefront, just given the fact that there's a lot of sensitive information and how we think about sort of the trade-offs between, AI and sensitive information, specifically within our finance department. So we're going to use that and kind of double click in it. So hopefully it'll be of value in terms of some best practices and things that we're seeing to help the audience as well kind of navigate that. So we're gonna shift gears and talk a little bit about co-building between IT and finance. And we're going to dig in and let me just show this particular org chart, which is really around co-building partnership, as I mentioned, with our controller in particular. So this chart essentially represents our controller's vision, Thomas, for what the future of his world kind of looks like. And he's been a very early adopter in terms of AI and leveraging Celigo in terms of, what he built. He said it, this is kind of like where he sees the future going. And this was, this was 5 years ago where he see this. Now we're 7 months into it, and now he says it's going to be about a year before we can actually get to this. So you can see that trailing, sort of minimizing in terms of where automation going from autonomy all the way to autonomous agents. And really sort of living in production from, collections, for example, has an agent running today. So maybe just like kind of help the audience kind of navigate sort of this, because I know you've spent some time with him in terms of orienting sort of what we're seeing on the screen here, what's kind of live in production, and familiarize ourselves with this chart here.
Yeah, I think what's really important here is that I talked about governance earlier and observability and controls and finding kind of the right balance and really wanting to enable. I, all that's important. But I think
Mhm.
one of the most important components is really a really strong partnership across your IT organization and the business units that you're really working to supercharge and empower. It has to start there. I think if you just focus on controls, I think it misses the opportunity to really help um, drive outcomes in the business using AI. And I think that's a really interesting opportunity for a lot of IT organizations and CIOs. They want to really help the business grow. They want to help the business accelerate its ability to deliver value to customers. They want to help each business unit find ways to basically increase the velocity of their core business processes. And so I think what's really important is that's where it started with between finance and IT. And so what finance did was really think about where are all the opportunities where I could place automation or AI? Where are there deterministic flows that are repeatable and kind of low value for us to operate manually? Where are there opportunities to insert some judgment?
Mhm.
And likely, especially as we started with the human in the loop, but to do a lot of the heavy lifting so that what the finance team is doing is like more strategic and high value checks. And
Mhm.
so Thomas really came with the vision. And he knows his area the most, it's really important that in each area, IT can't kind of drive what the vision is. I think each function has to really come up with that themselves. And so, our controller led with this, then that made it really easy for our team to partner with them to build these out. And as we partnered with them to build some of these out, over time, we were able to shift more of the building into their organization. And so
Mhm.
that didn't happen overnight, that happened over time. But I think that's the model that we're really trying to leverage across the organization. And it's been a really great success story. And it's one we tell internally and we're continuing to leverage. And I'm excited that we're, telling it to our customers as well, because I think it's a great model for how you actually really get value to the business and do it in a way that it's trusted, that you have the right guardrails and controls in place, and that you can actually start to federate more of the building. And so I think
Yeah.
it's a great example of that.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's really sort of it's a nod in terms of IT really being that co-partner to the business and not a blocker and understanding, how do we solve problems together rather than than not. So I'd love to maybe kind of dig in now a layer deeper in terms of the actual maybe one or two use cases that we can talk about in particular. So the first one that we'll kind of dive into is really around the T&E inquiries agent, and this is the travel and entertainment agent. So it starts with, rather than maintaining this static training document, this agent reads directly from a live policy. And that policy repository actually lives in Zendesk. That repository now covers far more than T&E, right? It covers payroll, equity, global policies, US policies, because we have global offices, anything with a strong sort of FAQ and clear policy documentation, right? It all sort of is housed there. And the inquiry agent was literally built in less than a week by reusing the hierarchy from a prior HR, agent that was built. This is really a great example of how sort of reusable components compress build time dramatically. So that's sort of the context, so the audience kind of understands. Let's kind of dig in as far as sort of your point of view on this and where you feel like there's opportunities even further.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is just a great example of, I think the team started kind of small and had a case that they wanted to address. Like I said, T&E, questions, inquiries, which happens pretty much in every company. But
Mhm.
then they were able to, start small, bring something to life, deliver value, and then they're actually able to kind of add additional capabilities as they learned more about and looked at more like, where are we getting more questions? What's the power of this flow look like? How could we kind of expand it and have it cover more, questions that are coming in around our policies? And so I think it's just a great example of, like I said, mapping a process, really understanding this is where we spend our time. That's not really high value. Understanding how to think about um, building it in an architectural way that also recognizes that things will change. Our policies are
Mhm.
reasonably stable, but they're going to evolve over time. And so all of kind of those architectural components were built into it. And now, we have like a running flow that like serves, a lot of our internal employees and doesn't really require finance to spend time on it. So you can spend time on, like I said, more strategic, higher value work.
Got it. Love that. Let's maybe talk a little bit about the next use case here, which is the ship to address validation agent. So this ironically was built during our hackathon.
Mhm.
We had a hackathon, and the problem that it's addressing is that sales reps enter addresses, wrong in Salesforce. I know it's a shocker for folks on the call, but sometimes that does actually happen. Wrong addresses, mean wrong tax calculations from a finance perspective. Either it's Celigo, eats the tax liability, or they have to go back to the customer, 90 days later and, either, ask for more money or, mea culpa, or it just, it damages the relationship. So there's all these sort of inherent, issues. This agent cross-checks the address against Salesforce. It validates that format. It auto corrects if the address is, either materially the same, and then writes the verified address back. So this is just a really good example of sort of, things that you don't typically think about, but that we could actually automate and make super easy. Any comments on this one in particular that sort of resonated with you?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think this is a great example also of, I think if the former one was really, I think finance, helping to deliver a better user experience, but also really helping to give themselves some time back. I
Mhm.
think this one's a great example of maybe solving a more systemic problem that touched customers, touched our sales team, and so really thinking about finance and IT together, thought about how do we actually solve this problem that doesn't just affect our organizations, but is just kind of a drain on Celigo overall and has a customer impact. And so I think just a great example of it's a small part of the process, but this is, solving real problems in terms of customer friction and internal friction and potentially internal, unintended costs that are going to help us just be a stronger business and then really help us deliver, a better value to customers. So I think it's just they're kind of two examples of one that's very, and they're both meaningful. But I think it's important to look at both lenses, like who are your customers and how do you make, interacting with them easier and simpler, and then how do you actually also help just build some of your own internal efficiencies? Because when you do that, you get time back to build more or basically like I said, work on more strategic areas.
Yeah, totally. And I think the art of the possible is just limitless, right? In terms of
Mhm.
the possibilities and how you can leverage a platform like Celigo, connect your
Mhm.
front office to your back office, have the right guardrails and governance controls, and really to be able to scale, if you're going from one business unit to multiple business units to multiple segments and regions. So I think there's a lot of opportunities there. Let me just ask you, as we step back and we look at sort of the landscape, do you see the traditional build versus buy model evolving as AI lowers the barrier to creating solutions?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's shifting pretty dramatically. For a couple reasons. I think, like historically, we would think about build versus buy as, some of this is still true, but what's core to your business in terms of your competitive differentiation. When something isn't necessarily core to your kind of competitive differentiation, you would tend to think you want to buy
Mhm.
because you don't want to necessarily invest resources in both building and maintaining solutions in that space. I think there's still a little bit of truth to that, but now what's really happened is, it's much easier to build now. And so kind of the barrier to building has lowered. The cost of building has come down. And so there are more, I see a shift more both internally and in conversations I have with my peers, more of a of emphasis towards building.
Mhm.
And so I think we're kind of rewriting what some of those principles used to be that I kind of mentioned at the outset. And but I will say it's easier to build, but it doesn't always necessarily mean it's easier to operationalize. So kind of balancing those two things. I do think the thing I'm excited about is the also the ability that we're enabling, not just it being easier to build, but we're trying, and this is what we're doing at Celigo, making it easier for historically non-technical folks to build. I said
Mhm.
earlier, we're becoming more technical, so I don't really like those terms anymore. But we're talking about, and that's one of the things that we are enabling. You saw it with the finance examples where we co-built, and as over time, more of the building transitioned into finance's hands with governance and guardrails from like an IT perspective. So I do think the building shift has changed a little bit. We're going to see more pressure on building than buying historically, but it's not going to shift, like it's not 100% shift. It's just I think that there is more interest in building where, especially for systems where we talk about them maybe not having materiality, maybe not having very deeply embedded kind of compliance logic. So I do think we'll continue to see more of that. I think that the hard part with the AI adoption era we're in is that, and this isn't new, but enterprises want predictability
Mm-hmm.
and non-deterministic. And so this is the area where I think we have the most tension. And so that's, I think, where as we're deploying AI and as we think about inserting AI into flows, that's one of the most important things, we're thinking about. Um, and so I think those are all the conditions the lens you need to think through when we're thinking build versus buy, and then uh, how much understanding of the underlying logic do you need to have versus are you comfortable assessing from a third party platform? And I think that's going to be kind of different for every organization and every kind of use case.
Yeah, I agree. So let's actually shift from that. So shift from the builder sort of use case and the conversation into more of the governance, excuse me, breakdown. And in particular, just elements that organizations actually need to think about to put in place to, right, move faster with AI. I mean, that's like the big sort of challenge right now. How do you think about that? What's sort of some advice that you might have to give to the audience?
Yeah. I think it's very important. I think first thing I would say is if you don't have one already, put an AI governance council in place.
Mm.
You need help kind of across the organization to approach this in the right way. You want to do it across IT, security, legal. You also want to include the business because you want to think about what's the right governance model for your organization. And then in terms of like more practical elements, first, I think you want to have visibility. You want to know what's being built across your enterprise. You want to have two, you want to have observability. So you want to see what's happening in real time. You want to have auditability, so be able to trace decisions after the fact and evaluate their effectiveness. And then alerting. I think knowing when and monitoring and alerting, knowing when something falls out of kind of an acceptable range. So that's high level, but I think those are the components that I think about when I think about governance. And I think when you think about putting a policy and an approach in place, those are the components that you need. And then you need kind of the tooling that maps to that so that you can actually get the visibility, observability, auditability, and alerting. I think when you have those things, it's easier to move fast. When you don't have them, um, it it is very hard because you don't have the clarity of understanding what's happening. And so I think those organizations tend to go slower. So all of these things, in my mind, governance enables speed. It doesn't hinder
Yeah.
it.
Makes sense. Yeah. In fact, let's actually dig into a little bit of the data that we did on the MIT report. And for those of you that have been following us, hopefully the MIT report is not a new report that you're hearing. And for those of you that are new, we did a report on bridging the AI gap. And as you can see on this screen here, one of the big areas in terms of who is actually responsible for ongoing sort of maintenance of AI workflows in production at your company. And you can kind of see here the breakdown here, which is fascinating, right? We've got a billion plus companies are most likely to have a dedicated AI team. And then the breakdown goes below that, which is 50 million to, less than 200 million companies in terms of revenue are more likely to rely on a departmental operations or a central IT. Does this surprise you, Amy, or is this kind of par for the course here?
I think this doesn't surprise me. I think this reflects, I think,
Yeah.
my lived experience, and I think if you even just look at some of the trends with SaaS over the last decade or more, I think that we've been moving in certain organizations and environments to more kind of business led and business kind of owned ownership over the technology that powers some of their workflows. At Celigo, we have a dedicated AI team,
Mm-hmm.
And they are responsible for both the platform, our AI strategy, our AI architecture, governing kind of our production environment and the flows that operate there. We also have other components of the team, but that do some of the governance. But I'll just focus on this kind of AI oversight. But I think over time, what we're we when we do have federated building happening, like I described with finance, and we want to continue to move in that direction and shape that model. And so but that's an active kind of refinement. So that's not an overnight shift, that's an overtime shift. Similar to how we approach with finance, we're doing that across our organization. So for us, it's going to kind of be a blend of, we do have a dedicated AI team that's setting the foundation, that's owning the platform, that's owning the access controls, that's owning the governance.
Mm-hmm.
And over time that, we have more builders that are in different functions, really kind of governing the workflows. They're definitely starting to build. I think on the
Mm-hmm.
productionization, on the production side, the AI team is still heavily, owning, governing, monitoring kind of those flows. And that's one of those shifts that we're looking to continue to make and find the right kind of balance of where our ownership ends and where the business starts. But I think it's a
Yep.
really exciting time because, like I said, I think of it as we're really becoming that platform team that supercharges and enables every employee inside the company. But we're on the journey. We're not at the destination yet.
Yes, I agree. I agree. And in fact, that's probably a good sort of segue into the next section. So Amy and I spent some time, obviously talking through governance and the AI governance in particular. And as we think about organizations, yes, you need to have the council, you need to have all of the things that Amy mentioned in terms of thinking about that checklist. The first is really starts with the data access, right? Is the AI agent, access limited explicitly to, specific data sources and permissioning? And, let's just kind of move to the next slide here, and we can cover that, which is when we think about data access. For us in particular, like IT configures Celigo's MCP server to kind of expose specific enterprise capabilities as governed tools, right? Each capability is explicitly defined, so no agent really has access to anything outside of those configured scope. And can it be, so I guess just like, do you want to maybe just double down and talk a little bit about sort of the data access as you think about AI governance as part of your checklist?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's really important is I think MCP is the new protocol for data accessibility. I think we've launched our MCP server this year. We are actively using that inside of Celigo to manage our own agentic connectivity into
Mm-hmm.
different enterprise systems that we have and to really govern what we want those agents to be able to do. This is a critical this is one of the most critical aspects of when I think of governance and data accessibility. So this is where we have the IT controls. We define the connectivity, like we define the API kind of access model, we define the MCP servers, and then we work with the business units to define like what do we want them to be able to do, and what are the right users or groups that should be allowed to do these actions. And so it's very much a kind of co-design capability, but then we build these and make these available. And this is an example of like we kind of provide that foundational layer, and then that allows flows to be built on top of that. But we have confidence that the controls around the data are designed in according to our needs, our requirements in terms of compliance, and our requirements in terms of just data protection and PII sensitivity in general. So this is one of those things that gives me a lot of comfort and confidence as we federate that we have this kind of control point.
Yeah, for sure. And just to let our attendees know as well, I mean, Celigo can be accessed from, Claude or, your favorite LLM tool, ChatGPT or Gemini or whatnot, and it captures AI native users searching for a specific workflow. We have the headless CLI sort of component. And then we obviously have the automation within the UI through Aura. For those of you that are not familiar, Celigo Aura is sort of the native, it's the interface within the platform that's available. So it really helps kind of navigate through the platform. You tell it what you want to do, and then it connects those systems. So sort of a two-pronged way of kind of how we think about engaging with the data. It could be the headless way, or it could be really through the platform. So good for folks to understand that as well. So if we move sort of to the next section within our checklist, it's allowed actions is sort of the framing here, but essentially it's what is the AI agent allowed to do? Can it read? Can it update? Can it trigger? And are those actions clearly defined and controlled? So the takeaway here is that agents built within or outside of Celigo really connect through that same governed layer. Do you wanna comment on that any further?
Yeah, I mean, I think just as a follow on to kind of the MCP server creation, this is just more prescriptively defining
Mhm.
what is actually allowed in a very explicit and defined way. And what I love about it is it's done in a way that, again, that you can, an average person can understand what's happening here and what's allowed and what isn't allowed. Because I also think that's also what helps bridge the kind of gap when you're building in terms of making sure that what's being built reflects what is, desired.
Mhm.
And it's just, again, like it allows us to say, these are the very precise actions that can be taken, and we have a very clear control point around that. No matter what the source system allows or what the user's authorization or the account authorization allows, we're actually able to do it much more fine-grained. Another control point that I think is really critical in building trust and being really crisp and clear around what an agent is actually able to do.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the other piece is the data handling, right? So you've got, they're allowed to do the actions. So how is the data now being passed between the systems? Is
Mhm.
sensitive information stored in the model? Is it kept within control systems? Super relevant for different industries, obviously PII information and whatnot. So how do we kind of think about that data in terms of the context kind of moving through that layer? Because as you know, AI is only as effective as that context. And if it lives in different silos and it's not unified, then you're kind of missing the point there. Anything here to comment on? If not, we
Yeah,
can move.
I think just like this just shows like I think the levels of where the controls are and how we kind of are able to one, federate some of the business owned automations, but with really the strength of the IT owned foundation. And then what agents and AI workflows are actually able to do kind of inherits the best of both of those worlds. So the controls and then the context that like finance in my example has about the way that building the right flows that are going to kind of supercharge the velocity of their business processes. And so the agents and AI workflows can like are built on top of both of those. And I think that's the power of really both what we've built with the platform, but also just selfishly the power of the partnership that I described too. I think
Yeah.
both you need the platform and the partnership to actually supercharge and power your agents and workflows. And because a lot of us, like especially at Sligo, we have a lot of this foundation in place already. And so given that you have that in place in terms of what's allowed, the durable workflows inside of your organization, you can really get value quickly out of AI assisted or agentic workflows on top of that because you've already kind of done all of that kind of process work across your organization versus having to kind of think about starting over from the ground with a new agent. So I think that I think there's a lot of speed potential here too, based on the workflows that already exist in your organization.
Yeah, for sure. So for those of you that are tracking our governance checklist, so we started with the data access, allowed actions, we went to data handling. Now we're going to talk about sort of the ownership and control aspect. So we've talked a lot through this webinar around, making sure that the full control over permissions, configs, and changes, is passed through sort of the IT layer. So IT owns the MCP server configuration entirely, and I think that's a big sort of area that I think gives a lot of folks just grace, right? So there's no agent accesses, enterprise systems without sort of explicit permissioning. And I think that's really key in today's environment, right? Where you have a lot of and we talked a lot this, the democratization of AI across the business. And then how do you make sure that you actually have some of those guardrails and controls in place from a business perspective and from an IT perspective? Yeah,
Yeah,
makes
I don't
sense.
have anything to add here. I think kind of we've covered it up till now.
Yep.
I think this is a really important component, and I think it's really defining the in your organization, but I think our platform really helps you map to it is what's kind of governed centrally, and what can you federate out. And I think really the connectivity, the system access, the actions, all of those things being governed centrally within an IT organization, I think is the way to go fast. And I think we provide great kind of capability here.
Yeah, for sure. And then the last piece to our, to our checklist is really thinking about the audit and oversight, capabilities. So as we think about, do I have the right controls? Can every AI agent action be tracked and reviewed? Is it easy to revoke access or shut things down if needed? And so that's sort of the last piece is making sure that those elements are available and you have sort of the freedom to be able to do that. So that's sort of the rounding out of our checklist. So wanted to make sure we had an opportunity to kind of go through that. I'm just looking at the time here. So I think at this point, if there aren't any closing thoughts here, Amy, before we kind of open it up for Q&A from our audience.
No, I think we're ready to open it up. Let's hear what
Okay,
people want to
perfect.
know.
Yeah, let's do that. So let me just look through here. Okay, so we have a question from the audience. Maybe this one is for you. I can take some of these as well. So for those of us working with AI governance committees, what's the most effective way to present new AI initiatives and get them approved? Any thoughts there or advice that you might have?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think first, you really want to, one, I think most governance committees are there to protect the company, but they want to advance your AI initiatives. So one, think like, how can you help them get to yes? I think
Mm,
starting with a really clear problem statement and business outcomes. So like, what problem are we trying to solve? How do we think it's going to help the business? The closer it ties to what your business objectives are, the more compelling it's going to be. And so I think having a really good, like I said, kind of initiative defined there. I think second, really thinking about what the risk is involved with it and understanding the risk and framing how you're going to mitigate those risks, whether that's human in the loop, auditing, a longer testing period, whatever that is. I think really thinking through a risk lens, so business outcome lens and then risk lens, and then being really clear on the ownership model.
mm,
I
mhm.
think this is also a really interesting topic of late. Who's building the capability? What's the business responsibility? What is the system builder's responsibility? Make that really, really explicitly clear, not just in building, but in eventually you want to get to a production deployment. So trying to think ahead to what that would look like. And then I think just really having like a fallback, what are you going to do? What can go wrong? And what are the actions you're going to take if something goes wrong? So I
Mhm.
think just having that kind of all laid out, the business case is most important because I feel like if you don't have a good business case, then it isn't even going to feel like it's like worth an investment for the business. But then those
Mhm.
other capabilities are going to give more confidence that you've thought through the risk, what you're going to do if something goes wrong, and really the ownership model. And so that's my best advice.
Love that. Okay. This question is from Maddie, and it's how is Celigo managing AI governance in the product? I have concerns about PII and risk management. How do I know my agents won't go off the rails? Good question. I can take this one. So obviously we can dig deep, but Celigo provides multiple layers of governance to help you and kind of what I say, operationalize AI safely. For PII concerns, you can add guardrail steps to your agents that detect those PII, in inputs and outputs and route them, accordingly. You can also, have sort of a human in the loop checkpoints to ensure that those agents stay on track and maintain a sanity check, throughout that execution. And we're happy to kind of dig into that, but that's sort of what I would say on that one. I think we have one more time for maybe one more question. And again, happy to take your questions. Send them through. We'll make sure to answer those. The last question here is a lot of teams are getting slowed down by defining what is and isn't allowed in the business. How do you balance strong guardrails while helping teams kind of move fast? Amy, you want to take this one?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say the first step is really the organization and leadership, not just the organization, but organizational leadership has to align on its risk appetite. It sounds abstract, sorry, until you make it concrete. So something like agreeing on where customer data can and can't go is the kind of call that can then downstream unblock a lot of decisions that will get, made in isolation. So I think first, really that risk appetite and aligning on some core principles around sensitive data. Second is really try to build paved pathways. So what does that look like? Approved tools, approved use cases, sandboxes where anyone can experiment safely. Moving something into production it should be heavily governed, but experimenting really shouldn't be. I think a good analogy here is like speed limits. So they don't stop you from driving. They're the painted lines and signals that let you go faster,
Mm.
um, so that you're not worried about having an accident. But in a school zone, you'll slow down. The risk's a little higher. On the
Mhm.
freeway, which are built for speed and long distance, you can confidently go faster because the road was designed for it. And that's how I try to think about governance and how to think about balancing one, kind of the risk appetite, and then two, this concept of apply also the kind of guardrail to the risk. So, with the school zone, we've got kids, we want to be safe, we want to be on the freeway, like I said, like we're expecting speed and it's built for speed. So we can go 60, 70. Oh, I don't know how much people speed, but maybe higher. So I think that's I think how I'm trying to think about it. And I think a good model to start if you don't have a different one.
I love that. That is great. Amy, I so enjoyed speaking with you. Thank you so much. I always learn when I talk to you, so really appreciate the talk here, and I hope you, the audience, enjoyed just learning a little bit about how we think about AI and governance and guardrails and how Celigo can help. Like I said, if you have questions and we didn't get to them, I apologize. We will absolutely get to your questions. So please send them in. We'll make sure to answer those. This recording will be available to those that have all registered. So thank you for your time. And we'll see you on the next Celigo sessions.
Thanks, April. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.